The basement archives of the global repository stretched beneath Geneva like a concrete honeycomb, each cell filled with humanity's whispered memories. Dr. Rebecca Hayes moved through the climate-controlled corridors with practiced silence, her fingertips grazing the spines of document boxes that held centuries of forgotten correspondence. Love letters from soldiers, apologies never sent, confessions sealed in envelopes that yellowed with time. This was her cathedral, though few understood why it mattered. "Still playing with old paper, Rebecca?" The voice echoed from the entrance, carrying the particular confidence of someone who worked with telescopes pointed at infinity rather than microscopes focused on the past. Dr. Marcus Verne descended the stairs, his tablet glowing with equations she couldn't pass. He was everything Geneva celebrated: brilliant, published, leading humanity's most ambitious project, the First Contact Initiative. For 3 years, his team had been broadcasting messages into space, mathematical proofs and scientific achievements meant to announce humanity as worthy of cosmic attention. "Cataloging," Rebecca corrected softly, not looking up from the 19th century letter she was examining. "This is from a lighthouse keeper to his daughter. He's describing the color of dawn. It's beautiful," Marcus smiled, but it was the smile of someone humoring a child. "Dawn is just refracted light through atmospheric particles. We've explained it perfectly with physics." "He wasn't trying to explain it," Rebecca said, her voice quiet but firm. "He was trying to share how it made him feel." Marcus glanced at his tablet, already distracted. "Feelings don't translate across species, Rebecca. When we finally make contact, they'll want our science, our mathematics, universal languages, not sentiment." He headed toward the door, then paused. "There's a briefing upstairs in 20 minutes. You should come. We might be close to a response." She watched him leave, her chest tight with the familiar ache of being invisible to the one person she wished would truly see her. For 6 years they'd worked in the same building. For 6 years she'd loved him from a distance, knowing that to someone who measured worth in discoveries and breakthroughs, a woman who preserved old letters would never register as significant. Rebecca returned to her work, carefully placing the lighthouse keeper's letter in its acid-free sleeve. These words had survived a century and a half. They would survive longer still, even if no one came to read them. The alarm shattered the archive's silence at 3:47 p.m. Rebecca's hands froze over a box of World War II correspondence as the building's emergency systems activated. Red lights pulsed along the corridors. Above her she heard running footsteps, shouting voices, the cacophony of controlled panic. Her phone erupted with notifications. She pulled it from her pocket, her breath catching as she read the alert, scrolling across every screen in the world. Unidentified vessels entering Earth orbit. This is not a drill. Rebecca ran for the stairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. The ground floor had transformed into chaos, scientists crowding around monitors, security personnel shouting coordinates, and at the center of it all, Marcus, his face illuminated by a holographic display showing 12 enormous ships arranged in a precise geometric pattern above the planet. They responded, someone whispered, awe and terror blending in their voice. The ships were beautiful and terrible, crystalline structures that seemed to bend light around them, pulsing with colors that had no names in human language. For 72 hours they simply waited, silent as tombstones in the sky. Then they spoke. The message came not in radio waves but directly into every electronic device simultaneously, bypassing every security protocol humanity had designed. The voice was layered, harmonic, neither male nor female. "We are the Kashari Collective. We have observed your transmissions. We have evaluated your worth." Marcus stood before the communication array, dozens of scientists surrounding him. "This is Dr. Marcus Verne of Earth's First Contact Initiative. We welcome dialogue. We offer our knowledge, our discoveries, your mathematics are adequate." The Kashari interrupted. "Your physics are elementary. Your technology is infantile." There was a pause that felt like the universe holding its breath. "Your emotional displays are primitive. You broadcast feelings like disease. You cling to sentiment like weakness. You are disappointing." Rebecca felt the room deflate. Years of preparation, of crafting the perfect first message, and the cosmos had found them wanting. Marcus's voice shook slightly. "We can learn. We can grow. Give us a chance to." The Kashari Collective has determined that Earth represents a culture of emotional instability. You will be placed under indefinite quarantine. No contact, no expansion beyond your system. You will remain here until you evolve beyond your primitive attachments or until your sun consumes you. Whichever comes first. The transmission ended. The silence that followed was worse than any alarm. Rebecca watched Marcus collapse into a chair, his face gray. Around her, people wept. Humanity had reached for the stars and been judged unworthy, not for lacking intelligence, but for having hearts that still broke. It was Dr. Helena Frost, the repository's director, who found Rebecca in the archives 3 hours later. The older woman's eyes were red but determined. "They're giving us one final chance," Helena said quietly. "One presentation before the Kashari Council. Marcus will show our greatest scientific achievements." She paused, her hand resting on Rebecca's shoulder. "But they want something else too. They said they'll observe one emotional artifact to understand what we insist on preserving. Rebecca, they asked for you." Rebecca looked up, confused. "Me, why?" "Because you're the keeper of what they think makes us weak," Helena said. "You have 6 hours to choose one thing from these archives. One letter, one piece of correspondence that represents why humanity's emotional nature matters." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Marcus thinks it's pointless. He thinks they'll just mock us again. But Rebecca, this is your moment. Make them understand what he never has." As Helena left, Rebecca stood alone among the million letters of the dead, carrying the weight of a living world. Somewhere above, the Kashari waited to judge humanity's heart. And somewhere in this vast archive was the one letter that might save them all. Rebecca's hands trembled as she moved through the archives, pulling boxes with mounting desperation. The weight of 8 billion lives pressed against her chest, making each breath feel stolen. She had catalogued thousands of letters, declarations of love, final goodbyes, apologies that arrived too late. Any one of them held beauty, but which held truth powerful enough to pierce the armor of a civilization that had abandoned feeling. She rejected a letter from Napoleon to Josephine, too grand, too performative. She set aside correspondence from famous authors, too polished, too aware of posterity. The Keshari had called emotions primitive. They needed to see emotion in its rawest, most undeniable form. At 11:34 p.m., with 3 hours remaining, Rebecca found it. The envelope was thin, the paper cheap wartime stock that had barely survived 80 years. The return address read, Pavi James Whitmore, 29th Infantry Division. It was postmarked June 5, 1944, the night before D-Day, before thousands of young men would storm beaches that would become their graves. Rebecca's hands steadied as she carefully removed the letter. She had read it once before 2 years ago and had to step away from her desk to cry in the bathroom. She read it again now, her eyes tracing the uneven handwriting of a 23-year-old man who knew he might not see morning. My dearest Anne, they told us no letters tonight, but I'm writing anyway because if I don't make it back, I need you to know this wasn't for nothing. I'm so scared I can barely hold this pen. My hands won't stop shaking. The guy next to me is praying. Another one is crying. We're all pretending we're not terrified. But we are. God, we are. But here's what I keep thinking about. Last summer, when we got caught in that rainstorm walking home from the picture show. Remember? You laughed so hard you couldn't breathe, and your hair was plastered to your face, and I thought, this is what I'm fighting for. Not some grand idea, not flags or speeches, just you laughing in the rain. Just the chance that somewhere, someone else might get to feel what I felt in that moment. I don't know if what we're doing tomorrow is right or wrong. I don't know if I'm brave or just following orders, but I know that loving you has made me more human than anything else ever could. And if being human means being scared and hopeful and heartbroken and alive all at once, then I'd rather die human than live as something less. If I don't come home, please don't let them make me into a hero. I'm just a man who loved his wife and wanted more mornings. That's all. That's everything. Yours, even if the world ends. James. Rebecca carefully placed the letter in a preservation sleeve. Private James Whitmore had died on Omaha Beach, cut down in the first wave. Anne had lived to be 93, and when she'd donated her husband's letters to the archives, she'd included a note. He was right. Love made him human, and his humanity is why I survived losing him. The presentation chamber was a converted auditorium, now filled with screens showing the Kashari ships in orbit. Rebecca stood backstage, clutching the letter while Marcus finished his presentation. Through the curtain, she watched him display holographic models of human achievements: the Hubble telescope, CERN, the International Space Station, genome mapping, quantum computing. The Kashari response was clinical. These represent expected developmental milestones for a species of your age. Nothing exceptional, nothing worthy of contact. Marcus's shoulders slumped. He looked defeated in a way Rebecca had never seen. As he left the stage, he passed her without speaking, his eyes hollow. And now, the Kashari voice resonated through the chamber. We will observe your emotional artifact. Present it. Rebecca walked onto the stage on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The audience, a mix of world leaders, scientists, and diplomats, stared at her with expressions ranging from hope to pity. Most of them agreed with Marcus. This was a waste of time. The aliens who had mastered faster-than-light travel and energy manipulation wouldn't care about old paper and older feelings. The main screen flickered, showing the interior of a Kashari vessel. 3 beings materialized, tall, angular, their bodies seeming to shift between solid and light. Their faces, if they could be called faces, held no readable expression. Proceed, one said. Rebecca's voice came out smaller than she intended. This is a letter written by Private James Whitmore to his wife Anne on June 5, 1944. He was 23 years old. He would die the next day, along with thousands of others, in what we call the Normandy invasion, a battle in a war that killed millions. She paused, gathering courage. You asked why we cling to emotions. This letter is why. She began to read, her voice strengthening with each word. As she spoke James's confession of fear, the Kashari remained motionless. When she read about the rainstorm and the laughter, one of them tilted its head slightly. But when she reached the final paragraph, loving you has made me more human than anything else ever could, something changed. The leftmost Kashari made a sound, sharp and discordant. Its form flickered, becoming less stable. The other 2 moved closer to it, their bodies touching in what might have been support or restraint. Stop, the center Kashari commanded, but its voice had changed. Something threaded through it that hadn't been there before, a crack in the perfect harmony. Rebecca lowered the letter. The chamber had gone completely silent. The flickering Kashari spoke, and its words came haltingly, as if each one caused pain. Remember, we had this once. Before the optimization, before we engineered away the weakness. Its form pulsed with colors that seemed wrong, discordant. We removed love because it made us inefficient. We removed grief because it slowed progress. We removed joy because it distracted from purpose. The second Kashari continued, and Rebecca realized with shock that it was struggling with something like emotion. For 3,000 years, we have conquered galaxies. We have built wonders. We have achieved perfect logic. A pause that felt eternal. And in those 3,000 years, we have not created a single new Kashari life. We stopped reproducing. We stopped connecting. We are immortal and we are dying. We didn't understand why until the third Kashari's voice was barely a whisper. Until we heard you read those words and felt something break inside us that we thought we had successfully destroyed. Marcus appeared at the edge of the stage, his face pale. Around the chamber, people were crying, not from fear now, but from understanding. The center Kashari spoke directly to Rebecca. This human, James, he died? Yes, Rebecca said softly. And his Anne. Did she survive without him? Rebecca thought of the 93-year-old woman who had carefully preserved every letter, who had written that his humanity had saved her. She survived because of him, because loving him taught her how to keep living. The Kashari was silent for a long moment. Then, we made ourselves gods. We achieved perfection, and we lost what made existence worth the effort. The being's form stabilized slightly. Your species is not primitive. You are what we were before we became this. Empty, eternal, alone. Earth's quarantine is lifted, the second Kashari announced. The Kashari Collective requests access to your archives. We wish to study what we destroyed. Perhaps there is a way back. The transmission ended, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Then someone began to clap, and suddenly the entire room erupted in sound, cheering, crying. The release of terror held too long. Rebecca stood frozen on the stage, still holding James Whitmore's letter. She had saved the world with someone else's words of love. While her own heart remained silent and unspoken, then she saw Marcus walking toward her, and the expression on his face was something she had never seen before. He looked at her like she was real. The world celebrated for weeks. Headlines proclaimed, "Love saves humanity" in every language. Rebecca's face appeared on screens across the globe, the quiet archivist who had spoken when science could not. The Kashari requested copies of 10,000 letters, their ships now orbiting peacefully as they began the painful process of trying to remember what they had engineered away. But Rebecca returned to her basement archives, seeking the familiar silence. She was cataloging a collection of 1950s correspondence when she heard footsteps on the stairs. She knew his gait by now, measured, purposeful, the walk of someone used to being listened to. But something was different. He was hesitating. "Rebecca?" Marcus's voice carried none of its usual certainty. She didn't look up from her work. "Dr. Verne, congratulations on the new funding. I heard your department received quite the boost after first contact." "I didn't come to talk about funding." He moved closer, and she could feel him searching for words. Marcus, who could explain quantum entanglement to anyone, was struggling to speak. "I came to apologize." That made her look up. His eyes were different, softer, more uncertain, human in a way she'd never seen. "For 6 years," he said slowly, "I've walked past you in hallways. I've dismissed your work as sentimental. I've treated the repository like it was decorative, background noise to real science." He sat down across from her, his hands clasped tightly. "And then you stood on that stage and saved 8 billion people with a piece of paper I would have thrown away." "It wasn't me," Rebecca said quietly. "It was James Whitmore. Anne Whitmore. I just read their words." "No." Marcus leaned forward. "You chose those words. Out of thousands, you found the one letter that could reach beings who had made themselves unreachable. You saw what none of us could. That vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the deepest form of strength." His voice dropped. "You saw what I couldn't see about myself." Rebecca's heart began to beat faster. "What do you mean?" Marcus stood, moving to the wall of document boxes, his fingers trailing along them. "After the presentation, the Kashari asked to meet with me privately. They wanted to understand why humans still pursued science if we knew emotion made us inefficient." He turned back to her, his expression raw. "And I couldn't answer them. Because the truth is, Rebecca, I've been hiding in equations for 15 years. He pulled a small photograph from his wallet, his hands shaking slightly as he showed it to her. A woman with kind eyes, 2 small children, my wife Caroline and our daughters Emma and Sophie. Car accident. Drunk driver. December 18th, 2010. His voice cracked. "I was supposed to be driving that night, but I stayed late at the lab. I chose work over Christmas shopping with my family. And they died because I wasn't there." Rebecca's hand moved to her mouth. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. I never knew. I never told anyone. I threw myself into the contact initiative because if I could just achieve something big enough, important enough, maybe it would balance the scales. Maybe being brilliant would matter more than being broken." He set the photograph down carefully on her desk. "But when you read that letter, when James wrote about being scared and human and alive, I realized I've been dead for 15 years. I've been the Keshari. I optimized away everything that hurt and I lost everything that mattered." Rebecca stood, moving around the desk. They were closer now than they'd ever been. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because the Kashari asked me what I was afraid of, and I finally understood the answer." Marcus's eyes met hers, and she saw fear there. Real, human fear. I'm afraid that I've spent so long being a scientist that I forgot how to be a person. I'm afraid that I've hurt you by not seeing you. And I'm terrified that I'm standing here now, finally awake, and it's too late. Rebecca's breath caught. Too late for what? To tell you that I've been a coward. His voice steadied, finding its courage. To tell you that every time you talked about those letters, about the lighthouse keeper describing dawn, or the soldier writing in the dark, something in me wanted to understand. But understanding meant feeling, and feeling meant remembering what I lost. He took a small step closer. To tell you that I fell in love with your voice 3 years ago when I heard you reading a letter to yourself in the archives, crying over someone else's goodbye. And I've been too afraid to admit that I wanted to matter to you the way those letters do. The archives' fluorescent lights hummed in the silence. Rebecca felt tears building behind her eyes. You think you were the only coward? Her voice came out rough, honest. I've loved you for 6 years, Marcus. 6 years of watching you look through me like I was furniture. 6 years of telling myself I wasn't brilliant enough, wasn't important enough, wasn't worth your time. She laughed, but it was wet with tears. I saved the world with someone else's love letter because I was too afraid to write my own. Marcus reached out slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, and took her hand. His palm was warm, slightly calloused, trembling. Then we're both fools. Brilliant fools, Rebecca whispered. The worst kind. He smiled, and it transformed his face into something vulnerable and real. Rebecca, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be open again. My daughters would be 19 and 17 now, and I still can't walk past a playground without breaking. I still work too much because silence is harder than numbers. I'm probably going to be terrible at this. At what? She asked, though she knew. At loving you the way you deserve. His thumb traced circles on her palm. But I want to try. I want to be as brave as James Whitmore, writing his letter in the dark. I want to be as human as you've always been. He paused, his eyes searching hers. If you'll let me, if it's not too late. Rebecca thought about all the letters she'd preserved, the apologies that arrived after funerals, the confessions that came decades too late, the love that went unspoken until speaking no longer mattered. She thought about Anne Whitmore, who had 93 years of life, but only a handful of years with the man she loved, and who had said that was enough. That love, even when cut short, was worth the grief that followed. It's not too late, Rebecca said. But I have conditions. Marcus's expression turned serious. Anything. No more dismissing feelings as primitive. No more hiding in work when things get hard. And Marcus, her voice strengthened. You don't have to be brilliant all the time. You just have to be here, really here. I can do that, he said. I want to do that. He raised their joined hands, pressing her knuckles gently to his lips. I want to learn how to describe dawn like it matters. I want to understand why preserving old paper is preserving humanity itself. His voice broke slightly. I want to introduce you to Caroline and Emma and Sophie. Not the way I've been doing it, keeping them locked away like archived grief, but really introduce you, because I think they'd have loved you, and I think loving you doesn't mean forgetting them. Rebecca pulled him closer, her free hand touching his face, feeling the wetness of tears on his cheeks. Tell me about them. And there, in the basement archive, surrounded by centuries of human hearts transcribed onto paper, Marcus began to speak. He told her about Caroline's terrible singing voice and how she sang anyway, about Emma's obsession with dinosaurs and Sophie's fear of butterflies, about the last Christmas they never had, and the guilt that had haunted him for 15 years. Rebecca listened, her hand holding his, and when he finished she said, Write it down. All of it, every memory. It belongs in these archives, as much as any soldier's letter or lighthouse keeper's dawn. Your love matters, Marcus. Your grief matters. Your family matters. Will you help me? He asked. I don't know how to put it into words. Yes, she said simply. That's what I do. They stood there as the hours passed, talking in the way people do when they're finally being honest. Marcus told her about the nightmares that still came. Rebecca told him about her parents who had wanted her to be a doctor, not a glorified librarian. They shared their fears and failures, their small joys and large regrets. They became real to each other in the way the Keshari had forgotten how to be real, messy, imperfect, beautifully human. When dawn came, filtering through the archive's small windows, Marcus looked at the light and said, "It's refracted through atmospheric particles. But it's also the color of hope, isn't it?" Rebecca smiled, her hand still in his. "Now you're learning." 1 year later, the Institute for Emotional Intelligence and Scientific Research occupied the old repository building, expanded now to 3 times its size. The Keshari had funded it, along with 50 other nations, recognizing that understanding emotion was as crucial as understanding physics. Rebecca stood in her new office, no longer a basement, but a room with windows that overlooked Geneva's lake. Marcus had the office next door. They'd decided early on not to work in the same space. They both needed room to be themselves before they could be together, but every day at noon, they met for lunch, and every evening they walked home together, and every night, one of them would read something aloud, a letter from the archives, a passage from a book, or lately, entries from the journal Marcus had started writing about Caroline, Emma, and Sophie. Today was different, though. Today was their wedding. The ceremony was small, held in the archive's main hall, surrounded by the preserved voices of millions who had loved before them. Rebecca wore a simple dress. Marcus wore a suit that Caroline had helped him pick out 20 years ago, altered now to fit the man he'd become. They had written their vows the old-fashioned way, by hand, on paper, with fountain pens that sometimes smeared. When the moment came, Rebecca pulled her letter from her pocket. Her voice was steady, clear, certain. "Marcus, you once told me that feelings don't translate across species. You were wrong. Feelings translate across everything, time, space, even death. Love is the only truly universal language." She looked at him, this man who had learned to be broken and whole at the same time. "I promise to preserve your heart the way I preserve these letters. I promise to read you clearly, even when your handwriting gets messy. I promise that when you forget how to be human, I'll remind you. And I promise that your first family will always have a place in our story, because they're part of what made you who you are." Marcus unfolded his own letter, his hand steady now. "Rebecca, you taught me that vulnerability is strength, that grief and love are 2 sides of the same coin, that being brilliant means nothing if you're not brave enough to be real." His voice deepened with emotion. "I promise to see you, not just look at you, but truly see you every single day. I promise to value feelings as much as facts. I promise that when the work calls, I'll remember that you're my home. And I promise," he smiled through tears, "I promise to always ask you what color the dawn is, because your answer will always be better than mine." They exchanged rings, simple bands engraved with a line from James Whitmore's letter, "Yours, even if the world ends." When they kissed, the small crowd erupted in applause. Among the guests were representatives from the Keshari collective, their forms more stable now, learning slowly to feel again. One of them had confided to Rebecca that they were naming their restoration project the Whitmore Initiative. A 23-year-old soldier's words, written in the dark before his death, had saved not 1 world but 2. That evening, as Rebecca and Marcus stood on their apartment balcony watching the sunset, he pulled out a notebook. "What's that?" she asked. "I'm starting a new project," he said. "Letters to you, 1 for every day we're together, so that if anything ever happens, you'll have them. You'll know." Rebecca leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the reality of this love they'd almost been too afraid to claim. "Read me the first one." Marcus opened the notebook and began. "My dearest Rebecca, today I married the woman who taught me that being human is not a weakness to overcome, but a gift to celebrate. I'm still scared sometimes. I still have nightmares. I still miss Caroline and the girls with an ache that never fully fades. But loving you doesn't diminish that love. It honors it. It says that despite loss, despite fear, despite the certainty that all things end, I choose connection. I choose vulnerability. I choose you. If the Kashari taught us anything, it's that perfection is a kind of death. So I promise to be imperfect with you, to bring you my doubts and my hopes, my failures and my small victories, to be as real with you as James was with Anne, writing in the dark before dawn, because you were right. Love isn't primitive. Love is proof that we're alive. Yours even if the world ends. Marcus Rebecca wiped tears from her eyes, then took the pen from his hand. My turn to write tomorrow? Every other day, he said. We'll fill volumes. Above them, the Kashari ships glimmered in orbit, learning to feel again. Around them, the city of Geneva glowed with evening light, and between them, two people who had nearly lost each other to fear began writing their own story, one honest word at a time. The aliens had laughed at Earth's emotional weakness, but in the end, that weakness had proven to be humanity's greatest weapon. Not because it destroyed empires, but because it built something those empires could never create. Connection. Meaning. Love. Two people brave enough to be vulnerable, and a letter that would last forever.